The leader of a Nazi group shot in cold blood and killed in his own home. The killer? His 10-year-old son. Join us next on the Murder Mafia for Sins of the Father, the story of Joseph and Jeff Hall. Welcome back, Murder Mafia. I am your host, the pod, Father Richard Bystron. We have a wild story for you guys today. Before we get into that, real quick, guys, I still have a ton of bracelets to give away. If you want a free one, it's very, very simple to do. If you listen to us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, all you need to do is leave a 5-star rating and review, like the Facebook and or Instagram page, message me personally, and I'll send you out one. If you do not listen on Apple, you can still get one by liking the Facebook and or Instagram, sharing a 5-star rating and review on Facebook, and messaging me that way. It's really, really simple. Also, guys, make sure to check out the Etsy shop that's linked on Facebook as well as Instagram. Our End Child Abuse line is still going. I had a bunch of orders that were placed in the last 10 days that were shipped, so you guys should be receiving those soon. Also, we have a Mafia member, Sandy, who has been a lifelong listener of the Mafia since pretty early on in the show, and her family member were diagnosed with COVID. Get well soon. Just so you know, the Mafia, send up a prayer for that. This case was sent to me, and it was, when I read the initial headline, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. When I started reading the case, there is a lot more to this than even I realized. So I'll give you a little bit of a backdrop, then we'll get into some details. There's a phenomenal article that I'm going to use for the majority of my sources from the Washington Post. This is a case of murder. It's clear-cut murder. But here's the problem. It's not that clear-cut. So Jeff Hall was a Nazi. There's no other way to put it. He is a white supremacist. He's dead now, obviously. And while his political views and personal beliefs disgust me, he was murdered, shot once behind the ear by his 10-year-old son, Joseph. So Jeff Hall was the son of Joanne Patterson. He was married before his current wife, well, before he died, was married to Letitia Neal. They had 2 children with her, Joseph and Shirley. Joseph was born June 19th of 2000. That happens to be the son that murdered him. The 2 divorced sometime after that, in which Neal had twins by another man in 2003. Late in that year of 2003, the twins were hospitalized for failing to thrive, causing in Child Protective Services removing the 2 children. Social workers reported that Neal's home had no electricity or gas. There were maggots on dishes, and that the children were filthy, malnourished, and had bruises. At the time, Hall was on probation for driving under the influence. As a result, his 2 children were temporarily placed with their grandmother, who we will get to here shortly. Hall was granted full custody of his children in the end of 2004. After divorcing Neal, he married Krista McCrary and had 3 more daughters with her. At the time of his death, he had 5 children. His former wife, Neal, moved out to California and remarried. She then came back to California only a month before the shooting, was trying to gain custody of Joseph. According to the grandmother, Joseph had issues. He definitely had some issues. And I'm not going to say he didn't, but we're going to get into that more. I will say this. The mother enabled the hell out of this. The mother, she can say she didn't. She can try to claim she didn't enable her son or that she wasn't aware, but it's garbage. I've got 3 video clips or 3 audio clips I'm going to put in here for you guys. The first one I'm going to put in here is the mother talking about him being a Nazi leader and actually joking like this is something funny to joke about. So that's what I'm putting right here. It's about a 30-second clip.
Jeff's mother, Joanne Patterson, went to some of her son's meetings despite abhorring her son's politics.
I wanted to make sure it was okay for my grandkids to be there, and I had a great time. It looked like any barbecue in any backyard in America.
But they were Nazis.
Well,
We're just sitting here talking about Nazis.
I know, it's crazy.
They're in your own family.
I know, it's crazy, huh?
My son became a Nazi.
Yeah, a Nazi leader.
So there you have it. That's the mother joking and laughing about how her son is a Nazi leader. Not something that, in my opinion, you'd be joking about, but, you know, different strokes for different trash, I guess. So for 3 years, Jeff Hall had been having difficulty finding work because of the economic downturn in the construction industry. This is right after the crash of the housing market. So lots of people that had anything to do with housing, construction, cement work, plumbing, which is, I believe what he was a plumber, had a hard time getting work. Unfortunately, because of his warped, twisted sense of politics, his perception that Jews and other non-whites were responsible for thinning the job market pushed him even deeper into his neo-Nazi movements. In October 2009, Hall led a group from the National Socialist Movement into a rally near a day labor site in Riverside. They wore World War II era Nazi garbage. It says garb, but I'm calling it garbage. In a November 2009 interview about the rallies in Riverside, Arizona, and Minnesota, Hall said, quote, "They're proud of who they are, tired of white guilt being shoved down their kids and multiculturalism. They can't see any reason for it." There's 60 Minutes did a great piece on this. I was going to post the whole 15-minute episode in there, but I just took parts of it. That's where the audio is coming from. The mindset of some of these people is so disturbing. And the fact that it's so dismissive by so many people and ignored by so many people is just astounding. Ironically enough, in 2010, he ran for election in the West Municipal Water District as a white supremacist. He was an openly proud white supremacist who ran for election and garnered 32% of the vote. That is a huge number. You would think that somebody that came out with beliefs like that would have crashed and burned. You would have thought. He didn't. He actually gained a ton of traction after this, believe it or not. In March 2011, Hall and his group, about 24 white supremacists, took the streets in an affluent, primarily residential Claremont in Los Angeles County, sometimes called the City of Trees and PhDs. They had a screaming match with counter-protesters. There was about 200 immigrants' rights activists that showed up, and they basically had a screaming match that almost turned violent. It didn't, luckily, thank God, but it was very, very close to turning violent. They kept saying and they kept chanting the mantra of, "We patrol the borders, we see the devastation, we see the drugs, we know the reality." There was almost 50 police officers and 8 different agencies that were placed on hand to control this whole mess. Just 12 hours before Hall's death, a reporter from the New York Times was in Hall's home interviewing him and members of his group. She also spoke to 10-year-old who showed off a leather belt bearing a civil insignia of the Nazi SS that his father had given him. Now, before anybody even tries to remotely come with the idea that I think this is okay or I approve of this, my family came here from Poland in the 1950s from a concentration camp. I think the people that do this kind of thing and have this kind of beliefs are disgusting. And I don't understand how anybody could want another person wiped off the planet, unless they're a pedophile or a rapist, of course, but for no reason other than their skin color or their beliefs. It's absolutely just ridiculous. So I'm going to switch over now, and I'm going to give you some of the information from the Washington Post article. Like I said, he was an unemployed plumber who he used to patrol the border. He would go to the U.S.-Mexico border looking for illegal immigrants. That by itself is ridiculous. The fact that he would go to the border looking for immigrants is ridiculous. Ironically enough, the day of the murder, they had a whole big barbecue, a party. I mean, it's really scary to see how, like I said earlier, how normalized this is. What happened after the quote-unquote party and barbecue was later that evening, he was laying in his bed. His son put a gun behind his ear from what they call zero range, which is literally pressed up against his skull, and shot him to death. Here's a 911 call that was placed from his wife that night.
After people left that night, the family watched a movie, Yogi Bear, as Jeff slept on the couch. The others went upstairs to bed. Then, at 4:02 a.m.,
911 emergency.
My son shot my husband. I need an ambulance. He's bleeding.
How old is your son?
10.
How old is your son?
10. Oh my God!
So that's just a quick, 25-second clip. That's just a 911 call. You heard parts of it. The mother is obviously very shook up. Ironically enough, the problem with this case isn't that the son was convicted. Obviously, he was going to be convicted. He right out away said that he did it. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to put about a minute-long clip here. This is the lead detective and the district attorney talking about the boy's demeanor and some of the statements he made right after the arrest.
You were the first detective at the scene after the murder, is that correct?
That's correct.
Detective Greg Rowe saw Jeff Hall dead on the couch. He says little Joseph, who was found hiding upstairs under his covers, described calmly how he had gotten the family's Rossi .357 Magnum from his dad's closet.
Went downstairs and shot his dad. He described how he used his 4 fingers to cock the gun and used 2 fingers to pull the trigger, and he pointed at his ear.
This was not a case of a kid thinking it was a toy and letting it go off by accident.
There's no evidence that this was anything but intentional.
Prosecutor Michael Socchio.
When he was taken into juvenile hall, he was so little, they didn't have shoes to fit him. So they had to go out and buy him a little pair of tennis shoes. He asked if he'd be able to keep the shoes when he left, which showed an absolute lack of understanding of what was going to be happening.
So here is the bigger problem with this. And I know there's going to be a lot of comments. I already knew before I recorded this episode that a lot of the comments are, well, he was a racist, he was a Nazi, good for the boy, he should get an award. And that's all well and good. I don't believe anybody should be murdered for their beliefs, because people have the right, no matter how wrong or right, to think however stupidly they want to. I don't think you should be able to be murdered for that. But here's where things get crazy. First of all, his son was only 10 years old. Okay. Second of all, apparently when I first thought I was looking at the case, I thought I was going to come across something saying the boy hated the lifestyle. He wanted to stop his father from having the beliefs he had, and something along those lines. That's what I was convinced I was going to read. The problem is that's not what I came across at all. The problem that I have with this is this boy was very, very troubled from a very, very young age. There is a lot of volatility in his life. He had some very, very serious mental issues. He was a fire starter. He had reportedly set between 50 and 100 fires, which, if you know anything about the triad, which is now being disputed by some psychologists, but if you know anything about the triad, one of the 3 legs of the triad is arson, the other being bedwetting, and the final being animal cruelty. Well, he also had a tendency to hurt animals. He tried to strangle a school teacher with a phone cord. He had been thrown out of several schools because he was violent all of a sudden. He became, out of nowhere, he would just start attacking students. Like I said, he attacked a teacher, tried to strangle her with a phone cord. The kid had serious mental issues beforehand. This is, though, again, where I think California is... You guys hear me rip on California all the time because I just think the legal system is an absolute joke in the state of California. Here's another problem with this. The state of California was, and I don't know if it is now, but at the time of this, in 2013, the state of California was one of the very few states that the police could take a child in, interrogate them, and did not have to give that child an attorney. Most other states require, if a child is arrested, it's not an option here, require a child, if they're arrested, to be given legal counsel, or at least an adult, to help them make decisions so they can't waive their rights, so that they know what they're talking about, so that they know that they may or may not be incriminating themselves. California doesn't. So the police take this little boy in and they start interrogating him. Well, he doesn't know really what is going on. As a matter of fact, like you heard in the clip, the kid was so tiny that they had to go out and buy shoes for him. They didn't have shoes that fit him. He starts answering questions that the state used against him to convict him. And I mean, I guess luckily he only received 10 years. He received a 10-year sentence for murder. But here lies the problem. If it wasn't for the state of California and their sometimes ridiculous laws, would he have ever been charged? Because if he would have had an attorney or a parent present, would he have waived his Miranda rights voluntarily? Probably not. Any adult or parent, hell, if I'm watching TV, I watch the first 48. I love the first 48, guys. But the first thing I always say is, you dummy, shut up and tell him to get you a lawyer. Any adult with a brain, the first thing they're going to do is not talk and ask for a lawyer. This little kid didn't even understand the questions he was being asked. And it's really, they kind of gave an insight to it in this Washington Post article, because it's just bad. First of all, a 10-year-old was being interrogated for almost 3 hours. That in and of itself, I think, is just wrong. He was allowed to give up his Miranda rights, which is, again, not cool in my opinion. The first question that Joseph asked police officers after they arrived at the crime scene was, how many lives do people get? Okay. Like you heard the district attorney say, he asked if he could take the sneakers home with him when he got out of juvenile detention. These are not questions that people would, or an adult with semi-cognitive reasoning would be asking. Another problem is that, again, I think for me, a lot of this boils down to him being 10 years old. There's not a 10-year-old on the planet who ought to be in the position of waiving a constitutional right without advice from an attorney. That's why attorneys go to school for as long as they do. That's like saying that would almost be a lot like allowing a 10-year-old to go into a hospital and perform heart surgery. Well, no, of course you wouldn't, because that's why doctors go to school for as long as they do. But why would you then let a 10-year-old waive his constitutional rights? And why in the world would you think that he'd be old enough to understand waiving his constitutional rights? Here's another problem, too, is that afterwards it came out that Joseph might have been abused. Not sexually or anything like that. But while he was with his mother, he may have been abused. And they feel like that could have also played a huge role in his development later on. Because ironically enough, by all accounts, Jeff Hall was a great dad. I mean, obviously, I think being a great dad goes out the window as soon as you introduce your children to type of psycho beliefs that he believed in. I think that whole being a great dad thing goes right out the window, but that's just me. At the age of 3, he had uncontrollable outbursts where he became physically violent. His grandmother couldn't even babysit him when he was 3 years old because he became so violent. At school, he was very, very difficult. He couldn't sit still. He threw violent temper tantrums. Like I said, he attacked students. He attacked teachers. He had to be physically restrained and removed from class they figured about 25 times. That's crazy. He had been given medication for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and he had a well below average intelligence. He had been to 6 different schools before finally being pulled out and being homeschooled, which, in my opinion, is a bad idea. If you already have a child that has severe behavioral issues and what most people thought were mental issues, taking them out of a setting with professionals is probably about the worst thing in the world you can do, because it's just not a good idea. You're not qualified. Again, we're going to go back to the whole 10-year-old being a heart surgeon thing. You're not qualified to do that type of work. After police officers arrived at the home, they found Joseph hiding under his blanket because he didn't want anybody to see him. Again, this just goes to the mental state of the little boy and to why I don't think he should have been, first of all, charged as an adult at 10 years old is ridiculous. That's just so far beyond ridiculous, I can't even mention it. But this little boy needed and probably still needs severe psychiatric counseling, which I have no doubt he's not getting. Weapons, including the .357 Magnum that Joseph used to kill his father, were all over the house. They found a revolver under Joseph's bed where he hid it after killing his father. They found a .22 caliber loaded rifle leaning up against his wall. An unlocked cabinet had ammunition and several knives and swords. Again, there's so many wrong parts to this. Joseph was asked in court what he thought "you have the right to remain silent" meant. He thought it meant he had the right to stay calm. When he was asked anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law meant, he didn't respond because he didn't know. When he was asked, "you have the right to talk to a lawyer and have a lawyer with you," he didn't understand what that meant. Court records say a Riverside police detective in charge of the shooting investigation did not read Miranda warnings until it was almost 12 minutes into the interrogation. Again, another issue. And it almost feels like the Riverside Police Department took advantage of him being 10 years old because an adult was going to know right off the bat. Anybody, again, who's watched any type of law show, criminal show, court show is going to know that they have to read you your rights immediately. A 10-year-old doesn't know that. So I almost feel like they really took advantage of this little boy here. Like I said, after about 45 minutes into the interrogation, the detective left the room for a break. His stepmother was recording, telling Joseph that he didn't have to talk to the officer if he didn't want to. "But it's good you told the truth," she told him, according to court records. The stepmother's presence during the interrogation is another component of Joseph's appeal because prodding him to tell him what happened. It's almost like she didn't want him either. She wanted him gone. She wanted him arrested. A 10-year-old being taken away. It's just, again, mind-boggling. Going back to the child abuse, the prospective child abuse, and the issues this little boy had, I'm going to put in the final clip here. This one's longer. It's about 3 minutes. And this is going to be, what's going to happen in this clip is you're going to hear all about him, the father, Jeff Hall, going from a good dad to abusive, and the child's predisposition to possibly being a killer, because it sounds like he might have been.
He was an amazing father and would do anything for his kids.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, my nephew would just look at him like he was his hero.
But in the last couple of years, the hero changed, darkened, whether it was the power of being a Nazi leader or the powerlessness of being unemployed. He drank more, she says, and was prone to striking out at his son and his wife, Krista.
My brother had shown a different side to him. Not all of the time. It was on random occasions, not predictable.
He was beating up both Joe and Krista, is what we heard. Is that what you've been told?
Yeah.
Young Joseph told police that he decided to kill his dad to, quote, end the son versus father thing.
Did he describe what the abuse entailed?
He described his father hitting him, kicking him, pushing him.
He found himself in a situation, or believed he was in a situation, that required some type of desperate act. What's unusual about Joseph Hall is that his solution to it was to kill. Most children don't think about, what I'll need to do here is kill my father.
As the police began to dig, they discovered that little Joseph was a volatile and violent child who had been kicked out of several schools for attacking students and staff, once nearly choking a teacher with a phone cord.
My grandson was who he was from the time he was born.
What do you mean?
He has absolutely no understanding of cause and effect.
It is so rare that a 10-year-old would kill a father.
Well, but you know, I wasn't surprised by it. I just somehow felt it could always happen, but I thought it would be when he was older.
Would this have happened if Jeff had not become a Nazi?
I think so. Probably later. Joe was still Joe, and they weren't having a lot of luck figuring out exactly what his problems were or how to deal successfully with them.
Little Joseph also had a history of starting fires.
Does he raise the question of whether a killer can be pre-programmed?
I think he had everything physically in place, that it didn't take much to bring him right along to thinking that murder is inappropriate.
So he was born the match, and that environment in that home lit the match. Is that a fair way to say it?
I think it's a very fair way to say it.
So like I said, you heard that for yourself. You know what's going on. My question is this. Did they know, the police should have known right off the bat that there should have been an issue with this whole situation. More importantly, they should have known that they should have, even on his behalf, contacted an attorney, spoken to an adult that had Joseph's best interest in mind. They didn't. This looks like a case in California where the only thing they cared about was making some cool headlines. The problem is, this has been to the Supreme Court. They upheld it. They for somehow saw no problem with this. But here's another bigger problem I have with this. The Attorney General, the prosecutor for Riverside County even suggested that Joseph didn't comprehend what was going on. He didn't understand what was going on. So if you're the district attorney or the prosecutor, why would you allow this to continue and to happen and to manifest itself? You have a responsibility also you have a responsibility to the people, not just to prosecute, but to make sure that justice is doled out in a fair way. You didn't do that here. As a matter of fact, I think you kind of did the exact opposite. If you knew this little boy wasn't capable of making this informed consent, waiving his rights to Miranda, speaking to the police, you should have never allowed that to happen. I don't know. This case, I have an issue with so many aspects of this case. Okay, I really, really, honest to God, do. Here's another wild fact. In 2011, when this all happened, Joseph is one of 613 children under the age of 12 arrested for a felony just in California. Think about that, for God's sake. A child under the age of 12, there was 613 of them just in 2011 arrested for felonies just in California. I don't know, guys. I would love to get your thoughts on this one because I really am torn on this. While again, this is not the case. This is not a simple case of murder. Would it have mattered if Jeff Hall was a Nazi? If he wasn't a Nazi and he would have been killed, would it have made anybody feel any different about this? Or does him being a known white supremacist scumbag piece of shit make this easier for people? I don't think anybody should be murdered for their personal beliefs. But this little boy had a predisposition to severe violence. He had issues, has issues. Are they being addressed in juvenile hall where he's going to be released from soon? I don't know. I don't know. Mafia, we're going to kind of wrap it up for today. If you have any thoughts on this, please let me know. I really would love to know your thoughts on this because it's just such a weird, there's so many twists to this. It's just so much to it. But other than that, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Stay safe. And remember, everybody, evil walks among us.